When my siblings planned to control my aging parents' future without me, I showed up wearing old jeans, booked an economy flight, and landed a helicopter on the front lawn. They thought I was broke. Turns out I was just building an empire in silence. Let's rewind to how it all started. My phone buzzed across the desk, rattling the empty coffee mug like a warning shot. I barely glanced up. 3 monitors lit my workspace, each running security protocol tests for Aurelius Networks. I was deep in my own fortress of firewalls and encryption algorithms. I expected another update from a government client. But no, it was Colton. Just 3 lines, but they landed like a punch to the gut. The phone slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the desk. Cold coffee splashed across my jeans. I didn't even flinch. Willow Harbor. The name alone made my stomach tighten. I hadn't been back in nearly 2 years, not since the last gathering, where Colton played power broker, and Maris performed Rich Housewife theater like it was a Broadway revival. I could still see her diamond ring catching the light as she casually insulted me over lemon chicken at the country club. "When are you going to get a real job, Pies?" Colton had asked loudly enough for the neighboring tables to hear. This computer thing was cute in college. "But you're 30 now." Maris had leaned in with that fake sympathy voice and offered to talk to her husband's firm maybe. I could land something stable, like an IT support job. "Benefits and everything," she'd said, as if that would be a revelation. I remember smiling through clenched teeth as our parents nodded along. Concern in their eyes, disappointment just beneath the surface. None of them knew. They never asked. 4 months earlier, I'd sold my cybersecurity company for $64.8 million. They never knew because I never told them. The irony is painful. I left home at 23 with $260 and a suitcase full of hand-me-downs. Built Granite Key Cyber from a shoebox apartment, eating instant noodles while I coded firewalls for high-risk clients. And now, at 30, I sat in a rented 1-bedroom apartment with an 8-figure balance and the kind of financial power my family would never believe. They thought I was still playing with computers, but this wasn't about money, not really. It was about pride, about years of being seen as the family failure. The dreamer, the one they had to worry about. I could have picked up the phone right then, told Colton the truth, thrown it in his face. Instead, I stared at the message for a full minute. Then Noelle walked in. She didn't knock. She never did. That's why I trusted her. "You vested another 0.6% today," she said, placing a manila envelope on my desk. "That's another $11.2 million. She watched me carefully. Not for a reaction to the money. She knew I didn't flinch at numbers anymore, but for something else. "Will you finally tell them who you are?" she asked. I stood up, coffee-stained and disheveled, but something inside me had clicked into place. "No," I said, "not yet." "But I will go back." She raised an eyebrow. "On your terms?" "Exactly." And just like that, the decision hardened inside me like poured concrete. I wasn't going to argue, plead, or fight for a seat at their table. I was going to bring my own damn table. I booked a commercial flight to the tiny regional airport outside Willow Harbor Economy, middle seat, no fanfare. Then, just as an afterthought, I sent a quick message to Briggs, our head of security. "Need helicopter standby. Saturday afternoon, Willow Harbor." His reply was instant. "Understood. Landing permissions in progress." Noelle didn't say a word, but I saw the faint smirk tug at the corner of her mouth. She knew. They'd had control long enough. It was time they saw who they were really dealing with. By Friday, everything was set. The helicopter was scheduled. The estate was prepared. The medical director had finalized the care plans. And still I packed like a broke tech dropout, heading home with her tail between her legs. Noelle didn't question my choice of wardrobe. She simply laid the folded clothes across my desk. My old Stanford hoodie, worn thin with a tear at the cuff, and a pair of jeans that looked like they'd lost a fight with a laundry machine. "Your family costume," she said, almost reverently. I smirked.
"Exactly."
I wasn't going to show up as vice president of security architecture at Aurelius Networks. That woman didn't exist in their world. I had to meet them where they de-boxed me in, only to blow the box wide open when the moment came. Colton had texted again that morning. "Bring whatever paperwork you have about financials. We'll be discussing contributions." Don't stress, just do what you can. Like I was the weak link. The one who might show up empty-handed. Again. I boarded my economy flight in row 28, middle seat, between a snoring businessman and a toddler with a juice box. And I took it all in, the crying, the cramped knees, the stale air, because this was part of the setup. They expected me to arrive small, so I would. But I wasn't showing up to follow orders. I was showing up to flip the script. The regional airport was as tiny as I remembered, just a single terminal. The same vending machines from high school still buzzing near the baggage claim. I declined the corporate car. Took a rideshare instead. I wanted the contrast to feel deliberate when the helicopter landed. When the driver dropped me at the house, Colton S. Range Rover already parked in the driveway next to Elliot's sleek red toy, I took a moment. The two-story Colonial looked exactly the same, shutters slightly askew. Porch light flickering even in daylight. The scent of the lake carried on the breeze, clean and nostalgic. I tugged my hoodie tighter, not out of cold, but for what it represented. Then I stepped forward, past the family who never asked what I'd built, toward the conversation that would change everything. The door swung open before I reached it. Colton filled the frame in his usual uniform, crisp button-down, khakis, and a watch that probably cost more than my first car. His smile was wide but not warm. It was the kind of smile that said, "Let the performance begin." "There she is," he boomed, wrapping me in a one-armed hug. "Finally decided to grace us with your presence." I hugged him back, just enough to be polite. "Flight was fine," he smirked. "Economy must have been brutal this weekend." The comment landed like a slap, but I let it pass. That was his thing, establish dominance early. We walked inside, and I was immediately hit with the scent of lemon chicken. Mom's signature dish, unchanged in 30 years. Comforting, sure, but also a trigger. Like time had frozen and I was once again the underachieving daughter coming home to face the tribunal. Maris materialized next, practically gliding in with perfect hair and flawless makeup despite it being nearly 8 p.m. "You look comfortable," she said, giving me a once-over. Very Silicon Valley casual. Before I could respond, she pressed something into my hand, a Nordstrom gift card. "Elliot said there's an opening at his firm. Admin support. Benefits and everything," she whispered like she was sharing insider trading tips. I stared at the card. $120. Enough for a button-up shirt, and maybe some new shoes, interview armor for a job I didn't want. At a firm I'd never step foot in. "Thanks," I said, slipping it into my pocket. "Where are Mom and Dad?" "In the kitchen," Colton said, glancing at his phone. "Dad's having one of his foggy nights. Called me Stanley twice already." Stanley, my grandfather. My stomach twisted. I walked into the kitchen and felt my heart crack. Mom stood at the counter, leaning heavily on a walker I'd never seen before. Her movements were slow, pained. Dad sat at the table, eyes glassy, fingers tapping a chaotic rhythm against his water glass. But when he saw me, something shifted. "There's my computer, girl." His smile reached all the way to his eyes. "Hi, Dad." My throat tightened. I hugged Mom gently before she could struggle to stand. "Don't get up. I've got you." Dinner felt like theater. Colton dominated the table, going on about some renewable energy deal. Maris sprinkled in charity events and golf tournaments. Every story carefully chosen from Maximum Optics. "So, pays," Colton said, stabbing a piece of chicken. "How's that little startup thing going?" "Still doing, what was it, computer security?" "Cybersecurity," I corrected calmly. "It's going well. She needs a real job," Maris said to Mom, as if I weren't sitting across from her. "That's why I gave her the card." Mom and Dad nodded along, concern etched into their faces, the same old pattern. Maris makes a plan, Colton approves it, and I get folded in like an afterthought. "We've toured some facilities," Colton announced mid-dessert. 3 solid options. All with excellent memory care units. My fork paused mid-air. "When did this happen?" "Last month," Maris replied. "We took a long weekend." Colton flew in, "And you didn't think to include me? You were probably busy with your coding," Colton said, waving vaguely. "Couldn't afford to take time off," Maris added with a stage whisper to Elliot. That's when it clicked. This wasn't a sudden family emergency. This was a pre-scripted takeover. They'd planned everything, picked the facility, assigned costs, even scheduled move-in dates. I wasn't invited to help. I was summoned to comply. As the plates were cleared and the room filled with the scent of Mom's homemade apple pie, I started making a list in my mind, every dig, every decision made without me, every assumption about who I was and what I could offer. They needed me to stay small, to play the role they'd written for me, but I wasn't here to play along. And I wasn't here for revenge. Not yet. I lay awake in my childhood bedroom, staring at the same ceiling I once taped glow-in-the-dark stars to. They were still there, faded, forgotten. Like the version of me this house refused to update. The walls were covered in dusty ribbons from high school competitions, academic decathlon, state science fair, national coding finals. Evidence of a girl with ambition, before her family decided ambition wasn't enough. Down the hall, I could still hear Colton and Maris talking in low, tense voices. I wasn't supposed to hear them. 12% is already too much, Maris whispered. She can't afford more. We'll cover it temporarily if we have to, Colton replied. But if she flakes, we're screwed. Bowman's account is shaky, and I already pulled from savings. They'd carved me a spot on the team one with minimal cost and maximum deference. The poor sibling, the underachiever. The one who couldn't possibly contribute financially, so she'd better show up with her free time and good intentions. They built an entire narrative around my failure. And now that I'd quietly succeeded beyond anything they could imagine, I realized the truth. They didn't just ignore my success. They needed me to be unsuccessful. If I wasn't struggling, their choices, Colton's burnout job, Maris's designer mask life would start to look hollow. My apparent failure justified their control, validated their titles, made them feel generous when they handed me gift cards and advice I didn't ask for. I could hear their voices still. They weren't malicious. They were scared. Because if I wasn't the family's black sheep, they'd have to admit they were wrong about me. And worse, about themselves. That's when the anger cooled. I wasn't here to fight for recognition anymore. I didn't need applause or permission. I was here for Mom and Dad, and they deserved better than decisions made in country clubs and whispered hotel hallways. I reached for my phone and texted Briggs, "Standby for 11:30 a.m. landing." Then I set it down gently on the nightstand. No more middle seat. No more pretending. Tomorrow they'd finally see the real me. The next morning, the living room looked like a war room, except no one realized the battle had already begun. Colton stood beside his laptop, connected to the TV, clicking through a sleek PowerPoint titled Bennett Family Care Plan. Beneath it, Securing Our Parents' Future. Maris sat nearby, flipping through color-coded brochures of retirement communities, each smiling senior more staged than the last. Mom and Dad sat quietly on the couch. Mom looked tired. Dad was already slipping, his gaze locked on the carpet, shoulders tight. They were being steamrolled. Again. I sipped my coffee in silence, watching it unfold. As you can see, Colton said, clicking to a slide showing monthly costs.
Lakeside Pines offers the most comprehensive services. He laid out the numbers. Colton would cover 52%, Maris and Elliot, 36%, me, a symbolic 12%. Then came the cherry on top.
We know things are tight for you, Maris added sweetly. So we're reducing your portion to $600 monthly. And maybe you can help by visiting more often instead. I almost laughed. The performance was flawless. But the show was about to end. Thump, thump, thump. A low hum vibrated through the air. At first it sounded distant. Background noise. Then it grew louder, sharper blades cutting wind like a warning. Maris frowned, glancing toward the window. Is that? Everyone paused. The sound intensified. Books on the shelf trembled. The curtains fluttered. Dishes in the cabinet gave a faint rattle. Colton's expression twisted into something between confusion and annoyance. What the hell is that? I stood up, calm and steady. That's my ride. 5 sets of eyes turned toward me, confused, suspicious, slightly afraid. I walked to the front door and opened it just as the black helicopter touched down on the front lawn, its sleek body reflecting the morning sun. The Aurelius Networks logo gleamed on the side. The blades slowed to a lazy churn as Briggs stepped out, suited and composed. He adjusted his tie and started walking toward the porch with crisp precision. "Miss Bennet," he called. "Your transportation is ready." The air seemed to vanish from the room behind me. I could feel their silence pulsing, Colton's certainty cracking, Maris's narrative crumbling. I turned back to face them, my voice cool and even. "I think we should continue this conversation somewhere else. There's something I'd like to show you." They stared at me like I was a stranger, because, to them, I was. They'd spent years defining me by what I wasn't. Today, that ended. Maris rushed to the window, pulling back the curtain. Are you serious right now?" Colton's jaw clenched. "What is happening?" "I told you," I said, walking past them. "I came on my terms." Briggs held the door open for me. I paused, looked back, and offered the only invitation they'd get. "Shall we?" The helicopter sliced through the late morning sky, blades thumping like a heartbeat. My parents sat beside me, eyes wide, hands clasped. Across from them, Colton stared out the window, jaw tight. Maris gripped her handbag like a lifeline, her usual poise cracking under pressure. Elliot hadn't spoken since we lifted off. Noelle, calm as ever, sat next to Briggs, reviewing files on her tablet. "Estimated arrival in 4 minutes," the pilot said over the headset. Through the window, the land began to shift, suburbs giving way to manicured fields. Then to the sprawling green hills that framed Haven Ridge. "There," Noel said, pointing. Approaching the estate, the reaction was instant. Below us, 27 acres stretched out in perfect symmetry, landscaped gardens, winding walking paths, and a restored Georgian mansion at the center like a jewel in a crown. Behind it, a lake shimmered in the sun, and off to one side, a newly paved helipad sat nestled between a grove of oaks. "That's huge," Colton muttered. Mom blinked rapidly. "Is this a hospital?" Dad leaned forward, recognition flickering in his gaze. "That looks like a university, or a museum." "No," I said quietly. "That's your new home." The helicopter touched down with a soft bump. Briggs stepped out first, adjusting his tie. He opened the door and helped my parents out gently, then turned to the rest of us. "Welcome to Haven Ridge." Colton and Maris hesitated, their skepticism turning into something else, something quieter, almost reverent as they took in the scope of it all. A woman in a tailored charcoal pantsuit approached, silver hair tucked neatly behind one ear. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennet," she said warmly, offering her hand. "I'm Dr. Eleanor Wiseman, director of the Camden Memory Care Initiative." Dad's eyebrows lifted. "Doctor?" "Neurologist," she confirmed. "Specializing in cognitive stabilization and aging-in-place care. I've reviewed your files. I believe we can do something extraordinary here." While Dr. Wiseman guided my parents, I motioned to the others. "Come on, you should see this." We entered through the mansion's massive double doors. The interior was modernized but preserved clean lines, sunlight pouring through the windows, soft music in the background. Nothing about it felt cold or clinical. It felt intentional. A man in his 50s approached, holding a tablet. "Miss Bennet," he said. "Lunch will be ready at 1. The East Wing is prepared. This is James Holloway," I said, estate manager. "Oversees everything from maintenance to nutrition." Maris's voice was tight. "You have a staff?" "Round the clock," James confirmed. "Chef, nurses, grounds team. And 3 therapists on rotating schedule." As we walked, I watched Mom's eyes widen at every turn. Dad ran his hand across the polished banister, murmuring about craftsmanship. Colton said nothing. Maris whispered to Elliot, who looked like he might faint. We entered the East Wing. 2 master suites side by side, connected by a private sitting room. One painted in soft lavender, the other in pale blue. Both with adjustable beds, built-in monitors, and windows overlooking the lake. "This is where you'd stay," I said to my parents. Together, but with space, we toured the therapy room next, equipped with post-op recovery, equipment custom-ordered for Mom's hip rehab. Across the hall, a sunroom featured planters with her favorite flowers and a corner shelf with mystery novels arranged alphabetically. Dad stopped in front of the books. "You remembered," he said, voice cracking. "Of course." Dr. Wiseman demonstrated a discrete wall panel that gave gentle medication reminders and monitored movement patterns. "It blends into the background," she explained, but ensures safety without compromising dignity. This is like nothing we saw, Mom whispered to Colton. Not even close. Colton's face was unreadable. We moved to the garden, where a horticultural therapist waited beside sensory stations scents and textures designed to stimulate memory recall. This isn't a care home, Maris finally said. It's a sanctuary. I nodded. That was the goal. She stared at me bewildered. How long have you been planning this? Over a year. And who's paying for all this? Colton snapped, tension returning to his voice. This kind of setup? It's not sustainable. It's already funded, I said, keeping my tone measured. Fully, the Camden Memory Care Initiative is a foundation. This estate is part of it, trust-backed medical oversight. Staff retention programs, longevity guaranteed, Colton blinked. A foundation? With joint healthcare power of attorney built into the trust. So you're not cut out your partners, he scoffed, but I could see the cracks forming. This isn't about making you feel small, I added. It's about doing what's right, Dr. Wiseman returned, her smile subtle. Mr. and Mrs. Bennett would like to stay for lunch. Would you care to join us? Colton hesitated. Maris looked like she might cry. Mom gently squeezed Dad's hand, and for the first time that morning, his posture relaxed. I turned to my siblings. This isn't a flex, I said. It's a solution. And one you're welcome to be part of. We walked back inside, the scent of rosemary chicken wafting down the hallway. For the first time all weekend, no one had anything to say. But everything had changed. The library smelled like old leather and expectation. I'd chosen this room on purpose, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a mahogany table at the center, heavy doors that closed with satisfying finality. It was the kind of room where people had serious conversations, and that's exactly what we were about to have. Colton and Maris sat across from me, their posture defensive, shoulders squared like they were bracing for battle. Elliot hovered near the window, visibly uncomfortable. Noel stood near the door with the portfolio in hand, composed and silent. This wasn't going to be a fight. It was going to be a reckoning. I opened the portfolio slowly. Before we continue, there's something you need to understand, Colton cut in, tone sharp. You can't afford this. He gestured vaguely toward the window, where the Haven Ridge estate stretched out in the afternoon light. A helicopter? A full-time staff? A private medical program? What bank did you rob? Maris crossed her arms. This is just some borrowed tech stunt, right? Another phase. Is this crypto again? They were scrambling, trying to reassert control. Falling back on the roles they'd rehearsed for decades. I was the impulsive one, the dreamer, the one who never quite stuck the landing. So I gave them the landing they never saw coming. I tapped the tablet. With a swipe, the screen connected to the library's monitor on the far wall. The title slide filled the screen. Granite Key Cyber acquired by Aurelius Networks acquisition. Value, $64.8 million. Founder and CEO, Paisley Gonzalez. The silence was total. Colton's mouth opened, closed. Maris leaned forward, squinting at the screen like it might be a joke. That's real, she whispered. Yes, I said calmly. 4 months ago. I tapped again. Next slide. My patent shard cloak, now used by 16 Fortune 100 companies. Next. Screenshots of bank statements, property deeds, trust documentation. Next. Organizational charts showing my current role: Senior Vice President of Security Architecture at Aurelius. Stock holdings, $34.2 million as of last vesting. Trust fund for Camden Memory Care, funded for $12 million with room to grow. This isn't temporary. And it's not a stunt. Maris looked dazed. Colton blinked slowly, his jaw tightening. Why, didn't you tell us? He asked finally. Would you have believed me? Neither of them answered. I turned the tablet around. This isn't about proving you wrong. It's about doing what's right for Mom and Dad. I passed them the trust documents, neatly tabbed and highlighted. The estate is funded. The staff is salaried, with retention bonuses. All medical care is covered. The estate is in a foundation's name, not mine. This isn't a play for control. It's a long-term solution. Maris stared at the documents. You built all this? I had a team, but yes. I built the company from nothing. From a one-bedroom apartment with a leaky faucet and a $200 laptop. Colton looked at me for a long moment, something flickering behind his eyes. Pride? Regret? Before he could speak, the library door creaked open. Why can't you children ever work together? Mom's voice, soft and tired. She stood in the doorway, leaning on her cane. Dad stood beside her, confusion in his eyes, but alert. Why is everyone angry?
He asked. The tension cracked. Something raw surfaced beneath the posturing and paperwork.
I wanted to be part of this, I said, gesturing to the folders, the screen, the estate around us. But you never asked. You assumed. We were wrong, Mom said, tears pooling in her eyes. We never saw what you were building. Colton lowered his head into his hands. I needed you to fail, he said, voice hoarse. To feel like I was doing it right. I spent years chasing titles just to feel like I wasn't falling behind. Maris let out a breath like a broken sob. We were drowning, and you were building lifeboats. Elliot stepped forward for the first time. I think she saved your parents' lives. We all turned to look at Dad. He'd wandered toward the screen, tracing the letters of the acquisition title. This is real? He asked. Yes, Dad, it's all real. A silence settled. This time, not cold, but cleansing. This changes everything, Colton said finally. No, I replied. It changes how we talk about it. But the problems are still here. Mom still needs surgery. Dad still needs care. And we all still need to work together. Noelle stepped forward, laying a second folder on the table. The foundation will be named the Bennett Family Foundation. Everyone's name on the board. Equal authority. Maris blinked. Why would you include us? Because I don't want to build a kingdom, I said. I want to build a family. They looked at me, really looked for the first time in years. No one had the right words. But for once, that was okay. The next chapter didn't need them to talk. It needed them to show up. The library emptied slowly, like a room releasing its breath after holding it too long. Mom and Dad moved, first returning to the sunroom, hand in hand, walking a little taller than before. The tension that had stiffened their bodies all morning seemed to melt, replaced by something gentler. Maris lingered behind, eyes red, clutching the trust documents like they were too heavy to carry. Colton stayed seated, elbows on the table, hands laced behind his neck. For a long time he said nothing. Noelle stood nearby, quiet but watchful. She'd been my anchor for years, and now she watched as I finally stopped drowning in my family's silence. I don't even know what to say, Colton said eventually. His voice was rough, stripped of bravado. You did everything I was supposed to do. I shook my head. No, I did what I was supposed to do. He let out a dry laugh. You're the youngest. You weren't supposed to rescue us. I wasn't trying to, I said honestly. But you needed rescuing just as much as Mom and Dad did. He leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling. You know the job I brag about? I hate it. I spend every day pretending to care about shareholders and mergers I don't believe in. I haven't had a real conversation in 3 years. That confession hit harder than I expected. The mask Colton wore, confident, controlling, condescending, wasn't armor. It was a cage. I thought if I succeeded louder than you struggled, then maybe I'd finally feel worthy, he admitted. But I don't, not really. Maris finally spoke. I've been in marriage counseling for almost a year. Elliot and I, she paused, voice catching. We don't even like the same music anymore. We just perform well at dinner parties. She looked down at the trust documents. You spend all this time building something real, and I collected handbags and followers. Maris, I said gently, you've always been good at making people feel seen. That's not shallow. It's just been buried under layers of expectation. She looked up at me, blinking like she wasn't sure if she was allowed to believe it. I turned to Noelle. Tell them what you told me. About the couches and the rejections. Noelle stepped forward, her voice calm but clear. Paisley worked 18-hour days, slept in the office. Turned down 3 acquisition offers because they didn't protect her team. She waited for the right offer, not the biggest. She paused. She could have walked away rich 2 years ago. But she stayed until it was stable for everyone. Not for herself. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Colton rubbed his hands over his face. I've spent my whole life chasing stability. You created it. For Mom, for Dad, for us. And I never even told you, I said softly. Because deep down I didn't think you'd believe me. Or maybe I didn't believe it myself, not if you couldn't see it. That was the real hurt. Not just the assumptions, but the ache of carrying something beautiful alone. Maris walked around the table slowly until she stood beside me. She didn't say a word. Just opened her arms and hugged me like she had never hugged me before. Not out of obligation, not for show, but like someone seeing me for the first time. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know, I replied. Me too. Colton joined us a moment later, resting a hand on my shoulder, awkward but sincere. We weren't healed, not completely. But something important had cracked open. Later we gathered in the sunroom, where Mom and Dad sat side by side watching the hummingbirds dart between feeders outside. Dad looked sharper than he had in days. I remember that girl, he said, nodding toward me. The one who used to take apart the toaster just to see how it worked. And make it better, Mom added with a soft smile. You always thought different, Dad said. We just didn't know how to see it as strength. Mom squeezed his hand. We were too busy comparing our kids instead of understanding them. Colton exhaled slowly. We've all been comparing, competing, measuring success with the wrong ruler. No more of that, I said firmly. No more roles. Just reality. Everyone nodded. Maris wiped her eyes. Then I have an idea. We turned to her. I want to volunteer with the memory care program. I can coordinate art therapy and storytelling sessions. Use my event planning skills for something real. Colton looked at me. I've been thinking about quitting. That job. It's killing me. Maybe I could work with the sustainability program on the estate. Start something new. Elliot, surprisingly, nodded. You've got ideas. I've heard you rant about waste management and vertical gardens. Maybe it's time you actually did something with it. We laughed, genuinely, for the first time in what felt like years. I looked at them. These weren't my rivals anymore. They were finally becoming what we were always supposed to be. A team. This isn't my success, I said, pointing toward the window. It's ours now. That's why the foundation name will include all of us. The Bennett Family Foundation. Colton tilted his head. You sure? Yes, I said. Because none of this matters if it doesn't bring us together. The sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light across the room. Through the window, the estate looked peaceful, stable, like it had always been waiting for us. For the first time in years, we weren't comparing. We were collaborating. And it felt like coming home. 6 months later, the Bennett Family Foundation wasn't just an idea. It was a movement. Haven Ridge had become more than a care estate. It was a living, breathing proof of concept. A sanctuary where memory, dignity, and innovation coexisted. Mom stood in the therapy room, balancing with quiet confidence as her physical therapist guided her through strength exercises. She wore her favorite lemon-colored sweater and moved without the walker now. Her surgery had gone better than anyone expected. You're 3 weeks ahead of schedule, her doctor told her last week. I just wanted to dance again, she replied with a mischievous smile. Dad sat in the sunroom, a crossword on his lap, a cup of chamomile in hand.
His memory care program customized down to the time of day, and his favorite music genres wasn't to just slowing the decline. It was reversing some of it.
They're working miracles, Mom had whispered to me once, watching him laugh with his therapist. But the real miracle wasn't in the medicine. It was in the presence of being surrounded by love, support, and familiarity. Colton entered the room from the garden, his hands stained with soil, sleeves rolled up, and a tomato in one hand. Mom, he grinned, your heritage tomatoes are thriving. Next batch should be ready in a week. Gone was the CFO in pressed suits. Colton had left the corporate world entirely 2 months earlier. He now ran the foundation's sustainability program, including a garden therapy initiative for other Camden memory care locations. I breathe out here, he told me once. For the first time in years, Maris arrived next. Arms full of sketchbooks and canvas rolls, her once manicured hands now flecked with paint. She ran an art therapy program in the East Wing, where residents created memory murals and legacy paintings with their families. Her relationship with Elliot was still uncertain, but she was certain of herself now. and that was enough. I spent years chasing visibility, she'd told me recently. Now I help others remember who they are. The weekly family dinners had become tradition. No boardroom tension, no curated status updates. Just laughter, shared food, and stories, both old and new. We didn't pretend anymore, we participated. Outside, the helicopter still sat on the helipad, no longer a symbol of shock, but a tool transport between locations. Rapid access to partner clinics, emergency support when needed. We didn't use it for statements anymore. We didn't need to. Our second facility, Camden North, was scheduled to open next spring, and the wait list was already over 100 families long. Even Dad had contributed a few ideas to the architectural layout. Don't forget natural light, he'd said. Memory clings to sunshine. Colton and Maris weren't just involved, they were committed. Strategic. Passionate. I hadn't just shared power with them, I'd helped them find their purpose. We even funded 5 other startups under the new initiative. The Bennett Second Chance Grant, designed specifically for unconventional entrepreneurs, people who, like me, had been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. The first recipient? Our cousin Jessica, 23 years old, designing sustainable fashion from recycled plastics. Maris introduced her to potential clients. Colton helped with logistics. I funded her prototype factory, and Mom, she started a podcast. Memories in Bloom. Every week, she interviewed residents and family members about stories they wanted remembered. Stories that might have otherwise been lost. Memory, she said in her first episode, isn't just about holding on to the past. It's how we plant seeds for the future. The walls of Haven Ridge echoed with those seeds every day: laughter, conversation, music, truth. We'd stopped performing. We'd started participating. Noelle, now the official director of the Camden Initiative, managed 3 teams across multiple sites. I still caught her watching me sometimes, when I was too busy to notice what we'd built. You do realize this was never about the helicopter, she said once, during a quiet moment in the garden. I know. It got their attention, she continued, but the truth got their respect. She paused, then added, and the care you built, that's what got their love back. She wasn't wrong. One by one, our family had taken off their armor and found something better in its place. Connection, purpose, peace. That was the real revenge, not making them feel small, but helping all of us feel whole. They thought the helicopter was the peak, the mic drop, the revenge, but that was just the opening move. What truly changed everything wasn't money or spectacle, it was truth. By showing them who I really was, I gave them permission to show up as themselves too. We didn't just rebuild trust. We built a foundation that holds all of us. So if you're building in silence right now, don't stop. The day will come when your world will finally see you. And when that happens, don't just prove them wrong. Give them the chance to join you.